AI is changing how work gets done, but is it really working? To answer that question today, we're joined by Pete Paschal, a veteran journalist and media executive with over 20 years of experience, from Chief of Staff for Content at CoinDesk to founded the Media Copilot. And Pete's here to share practical insights on how AI is making newsroom more efficient without losing the human touch. He's been featured on The Today Show, CNN, CNBC, Fox Business, NPR, and more as a thought leader in tech, crypto, and AI. So, Pete, we got fake news, deep fakes, less budgets than ever, newsrooms that get shrunk, with less people. What a time to be a journalist.
You got it. First of all, thanks, Juan, for having me here and that nice intro. You're keying in on some of the definitely some of the downsides with respect to AI and media right now. I mean, deepfakes is a huge issue. Misinformation, all of that is kind of a problem. Well, it's certainly a problem, but kind of being addressed in big ways and small ways. The number one way, I think, is really just a renewal of that good old journalism skepticism on everything they see and not trusting what you're seeing, even though someone with who may seem legitimate is sharing it, right? We're starting to work on things like content provenance, which sounds super fancy, but is really just sort of ways to track the history of images so that you can verify things quicker. But these technological solutions, which, I'm certainly support, are only like part of the solution. I think a lot of it depends on just human know-how, human common sense, and trusting AI is a little less than maybe we would by default. I think one of the big issues with AI is managing expectations. We kind of go in, we get our minds blown because it can write stuff and create images and do all these wondrous things. And suddenly our expectations are up here, and then we quickly run into the limits, and we're like, oh, you mean what it's telling me isn't always accurate? Oh, you mean it creates humans with 7 fingers or 2 legs in weird places? So it's like, once you get past the mind-blowing emojis, you kind of need to sort of reset, recalibrate, and realize it's like, oh, this is a tool. It's good at some things and not so great at others.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I know a lot of the work you do nowadays is coaching and providing education, or empowering folks in PR, marketing, and obviously journalism on how they can implement these tools, right? But given you're a guy that's very experienced on this industry, right? And you've seen, I'm assuming, a lot of things come and go. One of the things that was surprising for me, I'm not a journalist. I'm from I come from content creation, right? That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
That's pretty close. It's adjacent.
I mean, I didn't make any money either, and I can relate to that.
So it's very much like journalism.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually went to school for that. But one of the things you were talking that was surprising for me is that this machine-generated content has been used in big newsrooms for a while now, like way before ChatGPT was in everyone's mind. So if you could touch base really quickly on how's that, because I know that for many folks, that's, we all think ChatGPT was the one that started it all 2 years ago, but there's a lot more going on. So if you could walk us through that process of how journalism has been implemented, machine-generated content creation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a little not often talked about thing that AI has been playing a role in journalism for quite a while. So it's probably about 10 years ago now that the first AI-driven content was published. So there were a couple of places, really big sort of journalistic operations. So like I believe it was the AP, and a little after that, the Washington Post, and maybe a couple of others, that started looking at, could you output content on a scale that they couldn't before for certain types of stories. And this types of stories were the things that were a little more rote, like something like an earnings report, something like a sports score. And could you turn that, what is essentially templated information, everything sort of predictably in certain columns or spaces, and start turning those into articles in a fairly rote kind of way. And I found that it was a pretty solvable problem. I mean, not that it was a problem, but it was like they wanted to increase the output of this kind of stuff. It did require like a lot of labeling of things, of making sure there was strict adherence to a template, and then sort of figuring out the best way to distribute that content without it. There's things to consider with regard to Google and duplicative content and who the audience is exactly. So maybe Google isn't relevant anymore when it is this kind of road thing and there's different kinds of feeds. A lot of things to sort of figure out. But they figured it out. And they started doing that, like I say, about 10 years ago. They started ramping it up in various publications where it made sense. But this is kind of old school AI. And the most important distinction between this and ChatGPT and what we know of as AI today is that it wasn't generative. It wasn't using, the transformer technology and the natural language processing in the same way to come up with wholly original text, which is what happens now. And because of that, it was very predictable and deterministic, and you didn't have issues like hallucinations. But it also really limited what you could apply it to. It had to be these kind of rote kind of types of content. Now, when that switch flipped and everyone was like, oh, you know what? We can actually get AI to actually write stuff that's kind of more original and can emulate styles and sort of go into its knowledge base and bring stuff out there. That was a huge innovation. Of course, a whole different set of variables starts to get introduced. And we've seen sort of the issues with applying that before it's fully baked. And I don't mean necessarily fully baked in the OpenAI has to figure out the model sense. They certainly do and have improved things. But on the journalism process sense, you need to attach really strong ethical journalistic practices to what comes out of the AI to guard against its shortcomings. And I'll just say there were experiments that perhaps didn't do that quite so well. I think we could be, I guess, in hindsight, a little bit grateful that those happened to show the world the limits of AI. But I'm sure if you're one of those publications that tried to experiment with generative content and publishing it at some kind of scale, you probably regret it now. That said, the use case of having an AI write articles for you is not going away. It's the most obvious use case. There are, dozens, if not hundreds, of applications of AI into the journalistic process. But the idea of it writing articles for you is so compelling because it's such an obvious use case. It's still happening to some extent. And we have learned a thing or two. So the most recent story about this, the news about this, ESPN is now using it to write articles on what they call undercovered sports, things like lacrosse. Mm-hmm. And that's happening. But they've learned from those mistakes that I was just talking about, where you sort of have unqualified people checking the AI or just not checked at all or not checked adequately. So and plus they've tuned it and they've, we figured out a thing or two about how to customize AIs over the last year. So given all this, it's probably has a better chance of succeeding. And again, I don't think it's necessarily the thing you want to apply to all types of news, but for these kind of things that otherwise there simply would be no article, it might be a solution in those sort of, I don't know how rare the cases are, but it's a very narrow part of what journalists and media companies cover.
Mm-hmm. No, but you talk about, this technology getting implemented into newsrooms, how we're learning. And again, part of what you do and what you've done is if anyone was around in 2020 and buying crypto, probably you learn about this page or like portal called CoinDesk. I know I did back then when I wanted to figure out what's a Bitcoin, right? And you were the chief of staff for content there, so I imagine there's been a huge visibility on that work for a long time now. And one of the things that caught my attention is that you were there implementing AI initiatives, right? So you could thoughtfully do an AI enablement process or implementation into the company. Now, that's a very high visibility company. So what I'm interested in learning is not so much about the technology, but how did you make the case? Because I'm sure if I know anything about business is that most folks, and again, rightfully so, I'd rather the questions get asked, right? But like folks are going to be risk averse and there's going to be questions. So what's the kind of feedback you got once you started saying, hey, this is the direction we need to go and we need to implement AI because of X, Y, Z?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. heading up the CoinDesk's AI committee is like one of the most fun and certainly one of the proudest things I've done in my career. So when ChatGPT like fell out of the sky and started being this sensation,
ChatGPT, dude.
We realized we had to do something. We had to have some kind of approach to AI or a point of view at the very least. This was clearly something that was going to affect media. I mean, the content creation and possibilities were kind of endless. So we looked at what those possibilities were. So I convened this committee. It was a cross-departmental thing. And we started essentially thinking about what we wanted to use it for. We studied at all the kind of use cases that were public, and very quickly came up with a set of guidelines. And with the input of the committee, I authored them. We published them to make sure it was completely visible, not just to the staff, but to all of our readers. And when I went into this project, I kind of knew people would be skeptical of AI, particularly as a creative partner. I probably would have tried to figure out a little bit more about how to speak to journalists and folks on staff who were more skeptical than maybe I was. I was kind of went in with the mentality, it's here, if it's workable, let's make it work. But as you might expect, anyone in a creative position gets a little defensive when they first hear about AI. They're like, what, is this going to replace me? Like, my process is human-driven, and I'm proud of it, blah, blah, blah. So they feel a little threatened, and you got to have to sort of deal with that. So I guess I would say there were some people who were maybe involved with the committee or adjacent to it that were kind of like trying to set it up for failure, and that's not what I wanted to do. So the guidelines I wrote are actually still online. You can read them. I didn't entirely throw out the idea that we might use it in content. I just made sure that it was very clearly defined when we possibly would and what the rules around that content would be. And obviously extensive fact checking was number one on that list, right? If something comes out of an AI, you got to check everything that it's telling you. But there, were probably some cases, especially with long explanatory content. You mentioned coming to the site to learn what Bitcoin was. That's not a terrible task for an AI to write something like at least part of an article like that, which is sort of regurgitating information that's sort of widely been talked about all over the place. So then once we had the guidelines, we were able to we had that framework to start prototyping things. And unfortunately, like the crypto market at the time was not so great. CoinDesk wasn't in a hurry to invest in a whole different type of content, but we did actually end up implementing a couple of things. One of them was using the OpenAI API with Google Sheets to essentially create headlines for videos in bulk. So we're using something called GPT for Sheets. It's a very easy thing to use. That's the great thing about AI and a lot of these tools and models. You don't really need to know any code. I mean, just copying an API key and plugging it into another app, that's pretty easy, relatively on the developer scale. And once you're able to do that, you can do this sort of thing. So the only issue with our process was that we were working with GPT 3.5, which, by today's stand now, here we are a year plus later, and it looks very primitive what comes out of that. And, yes, you can do some cool things with prompt engineering, but I think we would have even gotten more say applications and better results from the things we did if we had access to GPT 4.0 mini and Haiku, Claude Haiku, and all these things. And I've obviously, as I've gone on to do the Media Copilot, those are sort of my go-to models for things that are like tools that I know are going to get used a lot, because you want something cheap in addition to it being good if it's like a custom tool you've done. So yeah, it was sort of put me on the path to really leaning into AI. Once I left CoinDesk, it was sort of charting my own future. I didn't really know it at the time.
And, it's interesting when you bring up one of the major hesitances, like you say, it's, am I going to be replaced? And that's definitely a topic for us to speak for hours, because if we try to reduce that to AI won't steal your job, person, I hate that phrase, and I think it's kind of like, it's lacking so much nuance, right? And I think you can make a case for AI replacing us all eventually, but also you can make a case about no, and a lot of other opportunities, right? But maybe we'll save that for another episode, because we definitely want to discuss that with time. But now, one thing that resonated with me, right, is like this hesitance from creatives that AI is going to replace me. But one other thing that automatically my mind goes to is the opposite, which is the trigger-happy CEO that gets excited because they can maybe save $600 a week and fire a couple of people because you press a button and now it's done. So my question is, I'm sure, especially as you work with corporations, and we don't need to name any names, but you may have gotten with leadership that it's a bit overly enthusiastic about what AI can accomplish. So how do you also tame those expectations for folks that might not be that used to hearing a no?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've definitely seen that phenomenon where the leadership is convinced AI can do something that might be beyond its abilities, or even more basic, like, we need to do AI because everyone's doing AI, and let's figure out what to do with AI and, throw a bunch of tasks at it that maybe a nut isn't ready for. Mm-hmm. So the big thing there is really education. And it's not just sort of education on what AI can do and can't do, but education on just what are the right questions to be asking. And, fundamentally, it's almost with any business goal. Like, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to, I guess downsizing is a thing. Like, every company wants to get leaner with AI, but it's more like, I think that's the wrong way to frame it. I think the best way to sort of think about it is AI properly applied will let your stars shine brighter. It will essentially let your people, your talented people, do more with their time. Because you got to, obviously everyone would need to upskill themselves and learn how to apply these things, but then also apply them on an organizational level. That takes some doing. And it's going to be there's going to be an initial investment of time and probably money into some of these platforms, and paying consultants like myself to sort of scope out tools for you and processes. But it's going to, it's going to pay off in the long term. And not only can you get more out of your people, like presumably, rather than sort of laying off people, we just don't need to hire as many people going forward, because hiring people is always a risk. And, I hear this all the time and again from PR firms, from marketing firms, even newsrooms. Like, if you hire the wrong person, that's a huge cost to an organization. Like, so if there's a way to somehow avoid hiring anybody and sort of offloading some work from your key people so that you can get more done and sort of get the better stuff out of them, that's kind of the way to go. But again, it all comes down to, what are your goals? If you're just doing AI for the sake of doing AI and you have something to prove to someone higher on the chain than you, that's easy enough, right? Get a Teams subscription to ChatGPT or something and throw in a couple of rules about private data and you're good to go. But that's not really going to do much. I mean, that's sort of the really dumb version of deploying AI is, it was experimental. Let's just give everyone access to chatbots. Well, the vast majority of those people are going to play with them for an hour and never use them again. You really got to do more than that. And honestly, I think the AI companies have more to do here too. I know there's probably a bit more robust training on offer now, but not for everyone, and certainly not for like Google, for instance, frustrates me no end. They release Gemini because they're in this race with OpenAI, but they don't really do a lot to show their users how to use it in some practical use cases.
Now, Peter, thank you for bringing that up, right? When we talk about expectations versus reality, because one thing you and I can agree is that, you've said AI can replace human creativity or judgment, right? But if we hear the PR pitch, as today, I don't know, it's late September. Yesterday we had Sam Altman, saying in a very Altman-esque way, we're thousands of days away from AGI, which sometimes it's, we keep hearing about the promise, not so much about the right now, and the right now is this sort of duplicity that I'm also hearing what you see, which is like, on one side, we're talking about AIs here, we'll have to be more competitive. All of us will have to figure out ways in which we can do more for less, because it's the way of the world, and, we can hit as much as we got, but it's the way of the world. So we need to figure out a way to make it work for us. But now, we're hearing this need for automation and being leaner, but also we don't want to create, content that is unleashing the revolutionizing aspects of AI, because then it's all the same, right? So you do have to maintain equality. My question is, how do we help folks find this balance between automation and maintaining this quality, this human judgment that you can tell, yes, an AI was not involved in this, because we can still tell. So how do you find this balance?
Yeah, that's kind of like almost the ultimate question, right, in society. And I feel like the goalposts on that will keep shifting, assuming these models keep improving. So yeah, first of all, you referenced Sam Altman in the essay he just wrote, and this sort of AI Shangri-La that's going to happen in I think he gave a number of a few hundred days or something, or a few thousand days. I don't know. Yeah, so I think it's just, first of all, I got to throw my journalism skepticism on a lot of these sort of proclamations from Silicon Valley CEOs, just because it's in their interest to make themselves seem really important, right? So there's a lot of hype around AI, and certainly there's safety issues that are sort of way above my pay grade. But it's also I don't really see the spark that would need for an AI to completely save us or destroy us, right? Maybe that's in the OpenAI Works, Skunk Works somewhere. I don't know. I just know it is in the interest of these companies to make them seem really, really important. That said, the human creativity and the human voice, for now, yes, you're 100% right. We can sort of tell that what's human written and what's AI written, largely. Really well fine-tuned AI prompted in a certain way can get really close to a human output. And that's going to get easier as they get better inference. So to what extent we need to sort of check approach that with some humility and sort of realize, what are we bringing to the table apart from just the writing itself? Certainly there is a human-to-human trust that exists when a human is interacting with you. I mean, it's why, in these, at least the older generation of customer service chatbots, you kind of want to talk to a person, right? Because it's like you're just going down this flow chart, and getting better now with generative, but you still kind of want to talk to a human. So there is sort of, and I can sort of project out from that in terms of creative works. Like if you see a really cool image and then someone tells you it's an AI image, I think in your mind it sort of gets a little bit cheaper. And you couldn't really explain why. You couldn't point to the exact artifact or the pixels, but you would know the effort wasn't there. And I think someone recently wrote about this, and I forget the author's name, but he wrote it in, I think, the New Yorker. And he talked about AI being sort of a measure of the amount of decisions you make around something. And that when you do a creative work, whether it's a book, whether it's a painting, whatever it is, the craft of it, like when you're really, really good at it, it's about all those minute decisions that in isolation don't really mean much, but actually make up the entire painting. And when AI sort of, to this person anyway, struck him as like the kind of thing someone would invent who thinks doing something, a creative work like a painting, is all about the idea and not about the actual doing of it, when those aren't really as separable as they might seem. So this is kind of a hopeful version of looking at AI, that maybe it isn't going to fully replace our human outputs, right? It's good at certain things, but it's less about taking those professionals, whether it's journalists, whether it's artists, writers, what have you, and replacing them. And it's more about leveling up people who don't have that skill to a passable level, And so this is kind of what I say about AI often. And again, this is my read on it, on the technology, and simply, which is informed by my being a tech journalist for 20 plus years, getting to that sort of breakthrough moment where it's really impressing you. So like that's what AI's passed. It got 90% of the way to doing something that as good as a human could. I think that last 5 to 10% is going to be much harder than the first 90. And so with respect to Sam Altman, who obviously has a lot more knowledge of what's going on in the skunk works of OpenAI than I do, I don't quite see it. I don't see some super future within sight where AI is going to completely elevate every profession, particularly creative professions, because of all these factors. Like, how well can you really replicate the professional level of something, and how will people respond to that? Because it is more than just the fact of the output, that it's there, that there is something to do with the human connection of the thing they're trying to communicate through that work that makes it relevant to you. And I don't know if AI is ever going to be able to simulate that. As it might get really close, and maybe by that point, we could consider the algorithms intelligent, and maybe they will have that spark. I don't know, but that's kind of like a whole nother level of AI that I don't think we're quite at yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming back, they love talking about the promise, but we're here to talk about what's happening right now. One of the things that are happening right now is you helping folks figure out how to use AI in their workflow. So for those folks in the creative industries, journalism, that are watching this episode right now, many times what I hear from them is like, sure, I use ChatGPT, but the rest, it's getting kind of overwhelming, or I'm sort of over. So when we think about this elevating, right, or how ChatGPT would probably say a collaborator, not a replacement, right? But like, how do we help those folks that have used ChatGPT a little elevate their work? Like, what would be, and you mentioned, sorry, I'm going to answer the first part, which is you mentioned knowing the why. That for me is super important, right? What are you trying to achieve, first of all, before you go to the toolkit? But like, how can we guide them to that second step that can get overwhelming so many times?
Yeah, so I love zeroing in on some of the micro stuff too, which is what you're getting at. Like, how do you use this stuff to sort of like, if you use it for an hour, you're not that impressed? Well, there are like two features like basically everybody, ChatGPT, who's a casual user, that they're really underutilized. One is custom instructions, which basically is a set of defaults that are tailored to you. Very simple to tell it about yourself, and very simple to tell it how you want it to respond. And I like to hack it a little bit. Like, it's not just like, I don't want you to be like casual, or I want you to be formal. No. It's like, do things like, give me headlines in this specific format when I ask for headlines. There's a thing when you use AI quite a bit that ChatGPT does that gets irritating, which is to say, you make it a request and it'll say like, send me a recipe for a good mojito. It's like, okay, here's a great recipe for a good mojito. And it lists the whole things and how to mix it together. That should give you a good mojito. Let me know how it goes, or if I can help you. And it's like, I have, just as a really prominent in my custom instructions, don't self-reference. Don't tell me what you're doing. Just give me the information, because it's this whole dispense with the pleasantries thing where I don't need you to tell me what you're doing, right? So that's a good little hack. That's a free one for everyone out there whoever's been irritated by these chatbots that just want to chat.
Yeah. I just want to bother you, sorry, for a minute, because here's something. You're the first person that I know that does the same thing. I have made a list of forbidden things, including using the word Delve, revolutionize the rocket emoji, or unleash. Those are like you're not allowed to ever use this. So I'll share my custom instructions on the description if anyone wants to copy them, so your ChatGPT doesn't say Delve either. I'll share mine. If you want to share anything, any custom instruction for the folks to implement, also, you're invited, Pete. No pressure, but please go on. I just had to quickly add in there.
Yeah. No. It's very common. I've got a long list of forbidden words too. But the other one's memory, ChatGPT memory. So memory is very similar to custom instructions, but it's a little bit more like files that you want to grab at the key time. So I have my own writing style sort of extensively sort of figured out for various chatbots, and I keep mine in ChatGPT in memory. But I find memory is also super helpful when you're working on a specific project. One thing that is just ongoing, say you're a writer and you have a specific client and you have a certain voice and set of information that's relevant to that. You can put that in memory. It's kind of a, poor man's way of doing RAG, which I assume your audience knows. It's like, retrieval augmented generation. It's specific data that you want your AI to deal to check essentially when you ask it queries. And various common chatbots implement this. This is something pretty common in no-code custom solutions, but you don't even need to go that far. You can literally just put it in ChatGPT memory. Claude now has projects. They've been around for a couple of months now. Exact same thing. You can throw a bunch of files into essentially a folder in Claude and say, okay, I'm going to be over here on this project, this writing project or whatever. So use those features. You will get much better output. You'll get less back and forth. You're going to put a lot less in like Google Docs and copy and pasting back and forth from that. Those are some go-to tips for anyone sort of just, likes AI, wants to do more with it, and is like, wants to go to sort of the next level.
Mm-hmm. And just like you said for folks, right, like start working on the little things, that customization that you can do in your ChatGPT, little implementations, right? I know there's tons of companies, startups, media rooms out there that need this very help, but they don't have the time to experiment. So they need to hire someone like you to do that. So what can we share about the Media Copilot, who you work with, what are you helping them with, and where can they learn more about it?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So right now, I do 3 different things. I do essentially content through the newsletter. I do courses. Basically, I teach AI to creative teams, and I also do some consulting. So that's sort of very specific projects. But the most popular thing is by far the courses. I teach AI. I do a basic class every month. You can sign up at MediaCopilot.ai. It's an hour long. It's good. I'll show you the things I just talked about, including a bunch of other cool tools, like one that even compares like the output of an AI across other AI. So sometimes people are like, what should I use, right? Should I use Claude or ChatGPT? You can literally check. There are tools you can like literally see side by side visually what the output will be if you prompt it in the same way. So that's a whole bunch of stuff. Plus, I'm really focused on creative professionals, like people in journalism, people in PR, people in marketing. What are the fundamentals you need to know to use it ethically and manage those expectations, like I mentioned, but also like, what are some good prompts? What are some good tools? So those are things I've scoped out, many tools for newsrooms. I'm excited to work with the folks who want to create like things, new automations for like social media. Some folks want to create automations for their newsletters. Often it's more about pairing the generative element, whatever that is, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, with just automating things through newsroom systems. And I'm very familiar with those, which, everyone uses some version of Trello or Asana or Airtable. Mm-hmm. You put in some Zaps. Again, a lot of this it used to be the domain of your engineering team and still is. Journalists who are industrious and have a tiny bit of coding maybe could easily build things that can simplify their workflow, and you don't have to get it approved up the chain. I mean, your mileage might vary depending on restrictions, but I'm sure if you can take it on yourself, they would welcome that the workload is simplified. So yeah, those are basically the things I do. I also do custom classes, which are very popular. So if you have a creative team, I do a bunch of these. I will take a class, and it's usually 3 hours, cut up however you want. Could be all one session, could be 3 sessions, and I will tailor the content of the class to your team. So I've it's often a PR firm, often maybe a branded content team. I've done some weird, like not unexpected, not weird, but like realtors have bought the class. Everyone has content, right? Everyone has to do things, whether it's marketing emails, whether it's marketing imagery, and they want to figure out how can AI streamline this process that I'm so used to going sort of back and forth with. And sometimes it's honestly as easy as showing them a tool that has built that. And sometimes it's a little harder. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is really custom stuff, but let's scope out a tool because, again, you don't need an engineering degree often to build something that is custom to your work.
Mm-hmm. And for folks, we'll be adding all the links down here in the description. If you're listening to the audio podcast, is there in the description as well. But I always recommend you check out the YouTube channel just because visuals are nicer. So, Pete, I have one final question for you, which is you have a young kid, they have seen this episode, they're inspired, and they're like, Pete, I want to be a journalist. Do we tell them, yes, go for it, or do we try to convince them to go do something else? What would you say to them in 2024?
It's interesting. I would honestly say it's almost the best time to be a journalist, even though that sounds nuts. But here's the thing. As newsrooms are thinking about sort of the rote work and offloading that to AI, but also recognizing the need they have to train the next generation of journalists, I think the potential for entry-level jobs in journalism might actually be even better than ever, because it's going to be filled with actual journalism, because they probably aren't going to give you a ton of, press release rewrites or, check out the social media and just do the tweets or whatever, when they've got AI doing that. So, again, I think I'm alluding to a bit of a pipeline problem, that if the old intern work is now by AI, how do you turn interns into, junior level and then senior level employees? That's a thing people can think through. But I think we can think through it and just go like, well, okay, let's have them do some real reporting. Like, just do that. That's what they're here to do. And so if you want to be a journalist and you sort of see what's going on in media and you want to make it better, or you just have you want to tell stories. This is why I joined journalism. I love telling stories, and I wanted those stories to be about the world that I live in. And that's great. Do that. And I think today you are going to be having more opportunity to do, mostly that, and not the chaff and the chrome around that job than ever. So I say go for it. You're still not going to make any money, though. Not for a while. It's a break in the
industry. We clearly have bigger priorities than making money. Otherwise, we'd be all the IT. I don't know.
So you definitely don't go into this business to be some financial success. So I think it's a given that you knew that.
And if you don't, now you know. Pete, it's been a pleasure and a privilege talking to you. We have so many takeaways, right? Like, you should understand your goals for a successful implementation. The human-to-human connection still matters. How I can help you make quick decisions, and the power of custom instruction. So we'll be adding all the links for folks to reach out to you in the description. Thank you so much for being part of this episode. And to all of you watching or listening, thank you for joining for another episode of Creativity and Robots. And I hope to see you again. Have a good one.
Amo la creación en mi pantalla, bits y bytes en danza, todo brilla, cada código que escribo canta. Sabor a cumbia.